Welcome to a Taxware video tutorial. Today we'll be talking about validity checks and validation. Validity checks can be found on the summary screen. The first thing to note is this dot. If it is red or yellow, that means it's highly likely that your return will be rejected by the Fed should you e-file it at this point. It's important that when this is red or yellow to check the validity checks. In this case, when we check the validity checks, we can see two things. First, in red are errors. These will almost certainly cause your return to be rejected. Next are warnings, which are not necessarily going to cause the return to be rejected, but there's a high likelihood of doing so. First, let's take a look at the errors. There are two errors here, the first of which says the preparer's city has invalid characters. This means my paid preparer, which means my preparer info. Let's go take a look at that. If we take a look, it seems I've had a typo on my city. I'll go ahead and remove that now. Let's go back to the return. One thing to note about changing your preparer information is that it doesn't change the preparer information on the return you've just done. The reason for this is if you've already sent a return, you don't want to change in your preparer information to change something that's already been sent to the Fed, as you want to have identical records to the Fed. In this case, we'll have to go and reset our preparer here on the basic information screen. On line 37, you can see that the preparer assigned is Taxware support. I'm going to click this ... button, change it to a blank line, click it again, and change it back to the new preparer that's been assigned. If we go back to the summary screen and to the validity checks, you can see that that error is now gone. The only thing that remains is a warning saying that the state schema validation has not been entered. Let's go ahead and do that now. Looks like there's no errors for California, so we're ready to go. Going back to the summary screen, we can see that the light has changed green, which means that the return is ready to be e-filed. Sometimes you'll get validity errors that don't show up on the left-hand side, but instead show up in this schema validation check. I'm going to pause and make one of those show up. So we can see here we now have a schema validation on the right-hand side. In this case, it says the element, employer US address, in namespace, government address, has invalid child element city name in namespace, government address. The list of possible elements expected is address line 1 text in namespace government address. When looking at a validation error, you can kind of ignore the namespaces. These mainly have to do with the actual technical code that's sent to the IRS. What's important to notice is what element is invalid and what it's looking for. So in this case, there's an employer US address. It's found a city name, but that is an invalid child element. This has nothing to do with children or dependents. A child element is a computer term for a particular input in a form. So this is saying it hit the city name, but what it's expecting, list of possible elements expected, so it's expecting the address. The next thing to look at is the XPath, which will tell you exactly where to look for this error. In this case, the XPath says it's in the return data, in the W-2, in the employer's US address. So in this case, I'm looking for an address that's missing in a W-2. In this situation, we have an error on the left-hand side. That won't always be the case, so it's important to note the XPath and how to read it. In this case, let's go fix this. So we'll go to the W-2. And put in the employer's address. Heading back to the validity check, you'll see it's yellow. The reason why it's yellow is that we used to have an error and we haven't gone back into the validity checks to make sure. So let's go do that. It's saying we need to do a schema validation for the federal, so let's push this button. So we're done, we can disregard this now. And the color of the light has been turned green. We are now ready to send this return. This has been an overview of validation and validity checks. If you have further questions, feel free to email us at support@taxwaresystems.com or give our technical support line a call at 1-800-877-1065. We'll see you in the next video, and thank you for choosing Taxware.